Hello there, and welcome to the Impact Zone podcast. We are back again, talking more TNA wrestling shenanigans. And today I want to talk about why you've got to keep a show tight and what that kind of means effectively. Now, I've sort of talked about this before, and I'm sure it's sort of come up and whatnot before, and it's an obvious subject again. It's one of those subjects that does come up here and there that people do tend to talk about, but I do feel like it is worth repeating and sort of going through and discussing, because it is important that shows keep tight. I don't keep my shows tight, although I should probably, but however, no matter, I do what I do, and a wrestling show is, like this show is certainly a product of that. Perhaps I should find that sort of thing, certainly, but again, that takes money. I don't have the money. I'm a one-man crew. Some people still don't realize that I'm a one-man crew doing all of the work that goes on here, and a bunch of other work on a bunch of other projects as well. So yeah, do cut me a little bit of slack, guys, I guess sometimes. But in terms of wrestling, I want to talk mainly about wrestling, because I know you guys would care more about the wrestling and whatnot aspect, especially with TNA and whatnot. But again, I just wanted to put that out there before, because some people have been saying, oh, you should do this and do that to the podcast, make it better. I get that, and I understand that. I would love to make it better, but I just do not have the resources or the manpower to do so, or the time, or whatever else, any of it. So, unfortunately, unless somebody wants to work for me for free, for many hours, it's a very thankless sort of task, unfortunately. So, yes, you will not see that sort of stuff for quite a long time, unfortunately. But anyway, back to wrestling here. So the main reason that things have to be tight, and by tight I mean not run too long. Now, you can make exceptions for this, sometimes saying, oh, this segment's gonna, like The Rock and Mankind's infamous moment, birthday moments there, that, this is your life, da-da-da-da, all that, that they did, what ran way over time, but it was super, engaging in many ways, because it wasn't just The Rock and Mick Foley up there, talking. They brought out, his teacher, his sports coach, The Rock's, rather, whatever, like there was somebody else involved, and then something else, like you had a lot of things to, kind of keep that moving and keep it going, and you always had something else. And The Rock and Mick Foley are obviously super entertaining. You had that clown out there, you had a whole bunch of, other things going on, so the fans didn't hate it, Now, you can still do that today, I guess, or something similar, but, if, obviously you can't do that exact same thing, because again, if you do the exact same thing as somebody else, it's like, well, that's really, an iconic thing that they did, but general things you can kind of do, and you could kind of say, okay, how can we do something similar? But again, saying like, how do we keep the show tight, the show moving? We can't have, like I said before, you can't have too many extended matches. Matches have got to be fairly short and sweet, that, and it does, like I say before, you shouldn't have these X-person versus jobber matches too much on like your proper regularly scheduled wrestling program, because they're nothing matches. People don't really want to see those matches, or they don't really make an impact when they're on TV. So, and if you are going to have those matches on TV, you really need more than just the match. You need something else, some part of a story that's brewing, you know, like, or whatever else, or some part of a story that's continuing, or something else. You need more than just saying, you know, we're going to send this person out there and they're going to beat this person. Like in an arena, it's a bit different, you know. The fans are there, especially when they're just starting to file in or whatever else. That's fine, because if you're saying, oh yeah, this is a barely anything match, okay, sure, fine, whatever. People don't really care, you know. But again, I get the argument that people make of saying, well, sometimes you need this quote unquote cool down match, you know, so the fans aren't, you know, when the fans are getting like restless or whatever else it is, you know, that sort of thing, because it's been, you know, especially when you've got a long taping or whatever else it is, or a long set of tapings, it's like, oh man, you know, like, come on, bro, you know, people want to go to the toilet, people want to go and do something. That's fine, I understand that, but that's still something that happens in the arena. And what you can do is take that footage and put it effectively anywhere. You do not need to put it onto your main broadcasting, you know, of the show, because again, you should push as much as possible the best things that you've got to showcase on your TV product. That's why things are sort of short and snappy in some ways. They're kind of, and this is another reason. The main reason that a lot of these things are short and snappy and you only get a little glimpse of it is to not overexpose it and to not give away too much of what's going to happen at the pay-per-view. You know, that's ultimately what you're trying to sell. Every week you've got to tune in to see these guys have their little promo, have their little scuffle, have their little thing, whatever else it is. And then they're finally going to fight at the pay-per-view. You don't want to see them too much or hear from them too much. Yes, you want to see and hear from them because, hey, they've got a big match coming up or whatever else it is. But you don't want to see and hear from them too much, because otherwise it sort of makes them like, well, wait a minute, we've, you know, like if we've seen, like obviously Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair, they're super popular. Whoever it is, Joe Hendry, he's super popular. But if he's in just about every segment on the show, it's like, this is overexposure, you know. He's being overly exposed. And the thing about like exposure is like 9 times out of 10 it is good, because you, when you're young, especially with younger wrestlers, you need that exposure. You need to be out there. People need to feel like, oh man, you know, like this kid, you know, like I'm starting to get that connection with this person. They feel like they could be a big deal, you know. Where are they going next? What are they doing? Where will they be? How will they get from where they're at to where, you know, we think that they should be? You know, all of this sort of stuff. It's not it's not as simple as saying, you know, you shouldn't expose people, because, you know, you obviously need to. That's what, you know, wrestling kind of does. Once you're out there, that is a level of exposure. But a promo or something else extra on top of you going out there and doing your match or whatever, same thing about doing a promo, or, you know, or the reverse, having a match, you know, like if you have a promo and a match, you're getting it more exposed because you're getting more TV time or more showcase upon you in the proceedings of the show that you're on. So again, that is not always a bad thing. But again, when you've got an older star or even an established star, it's much harder to sort of balance out sometimes how much they are used, because obviously with somebody again like Joe Hendry, you need to use them. They're the top star. Like somebody like Elijah, they're one of your guys that you're trying to position as one of your top stars, at least for now. Same sort of thing, you know. You've got all these people that you're trying to make elevated and feel like they're a big deal. You know, they're not just here because, you know, we thought we'd get them out of catering and say, oh, come on, let's have a bit of a tussle out there or something. No, we're here to go, okay, how come we are investing in this person? We've got to invest in somebody so that we can, get more eyes on the product, get more money out of what we're doing, and broadcast it more so we can get more eyes, blah blah blah. So it's a cyclical system sort of thing where it builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. But again, like if you're sitting there and you're going how many minutes or how many seconds or whatever else it is, and counting them too much and being too attentive, it is like, well, you need to know, does this feel right, kind of thing. And that's kind of like sometimes where it's like, it's hard to judge, but again, sometimes like certain things as well get sort of forgotten about or left to the wayside in some senses. So it's like, well, what are you going to do with these girls or these guys or whatever it is? It's the same for matches and promos. I said that we've already kind of gone through this for a lot for matches, but you've got to keep the promos or the whatever kind of activities, whatever is happening backstage, a fight, a brawl, or whatever else it is, or if it's in the ring or whatever else it is, fairly short. Because even if you have like 2 or 3 promos or 2 or 3 segments or whatever else it is together, if each of them is fairly short, none of them are like, maybe one of them's a little bit longer than the others, but again, it's not, you're not like lost in this land of like segments and promos, because you have that sense of, okay, we're getting a little bit of something here, a little bit of something there, a little bit of something here. We're getting this glimpse, what's next for this person, what's next for that person, how is this building between this person and this person, whatever, what's next, so on and so forth, always, and then you get a match or something, and then you might, like it does depend on what it is, but again, so then you see somebody else and it's like, okay, this person just won a match, is there going to be a run-in, what's, like, or are they going to have a promo, or, what, you're always trying to have that, like, saying, well, this isn't just a match, or this just isn't a promo, or a segment, a brawl, or whatever else it is. It's saying, where is this leading? So you've got all these little segments that are for, like, one person or 2 people or whatever, a tag team or a faction or whatever else it is, and that's building to a certain point and saying, okay, this is what's going down, this is what we envision, but you've also got to not just do that week to week or month to month or whatever. You've got to have at least a general plan, of saying, hey, where are we going in the next couple of months, where are we going in the next 6 months, where are we going in the next 8 months, year, whatever else it is. At least having a general penciled in, like, agenda of, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to do it, this is like, like what we think we're going to do, how much money can we put into, a new contract like Indy Hartwell, that, we talked a little bit about that, but how much, what are we doing with her? What's the first thing that we're doing with her? Promo. Okay, cool. Like, she already kind of had a promo, so, like, you've got to do more with her than just it's a promo. This has got to lead to something. And assumedly, in my opinion, again, she's been brought in to, do fairly big things. You don't bring somebody in, especially, now in this circumstances, it's like to just be there. Like, again, you could be saying, well, let's do something else with her, or let's put her somewhere else, or whatever else it is. But again, like, really she's got probably at least some sort of major-ish contract. So you saying, oh, well, we'll put her in the tag team division or whatever. If that's for something that she wants, okay, I can understand where that's going, but to say, I think a lot of the interviews that she kind of had, or at least one of the more memorable parts of one of the interviews that she had was saying, I don't want to just come to be one of the knockouts, I want to be the knockout, implying that saying, hey, I want to be the top dog, effectively. I don't want to just be here to be, just another face in a crowd. I want to be, the attraction. And that's really tough. I mean, it's easier in the knockouts division because you're not expected as much to be the major draw or whatever it is for the company. The men more do that, and it is a bit, screwy in that realm, because it is like, well, they should be, they certainly are something that people come to see, but you should treat them more like, hey, how can we make them or their division or whatever it is on par with the men's division? How do we make this division, not always, but again, like at least somewhat on par, with that. Like you can't always just find a Joe Hendry that everyone's fallen in love with. You've got to find your heels. Like you've got to find heels that people, will pay to see and will come to see week after week, month after month, and see who's going to try to take them out, So that's another thing. Like you've always got to be thinking, what is our circumstances, and you've got to listen to the fans too, because if the fans are sitting there, kind of in a match bored, it's like, well, this match, going too long, why is, are people, saying boo earns, people are saying boo earns because there is something inherently wrong with what they're seeing, in some ways. You can't take away from the fans. You've got to always be thinking about how you're delivering for them, and I talked about that before. But when you have these not super, like people say short, but I've said short, but like short can be about 5 minutes, or it can be, like a minute, it depends. If you have something for 5 minutes, I think that's, probably the upper limit of how something is deemed to be like a shorter segment. Like if you have 2 short promos, like 1 minute or something, and I'm not gonna, get too deep into it, but that's all right, because then or 2 or 3, whatever it is. So then you've got let's say a minute and a half or something like that, 90 seconds, so that's like 3 minutes there worth of like promo or segment, whatever, then you have like maybe 5-minute match, and when you say, oh, we have a 2-hour show, well, if you have you have let's say 4 or 5 major divisions, tag team division, world title division, knockouts world title division, X division, and then maybe the rest, let's say, like the knockouts tag team division, the international championship division, you've got all these other things going on, if I split that up into a show of saying how many of these 5-ish, 6-ish things, whatever it is, kind of get how much time on this show for 2 hours, it's like in theory, it's 1/6 of the show. So for like a nearly 2-hour show, which is, like 120 minutes, 1/6 or 1/6 of 60 is 10 minutes, so maybe like the most you can get away with for 5 things or 5 or 6 things is like saying like maybe at most 20 minutes. Like there are outliers. Again, you can do things like they did that thing with Josh Alexander a couple of times where they had him go an hour or past the hour mark or whatever it was, to the to TV time effectively. So doing some of those things, it sometimes is something that makes things work, so like you've got to think, where are we at, how are we getting there type thing. All these things, it's one of those things of saying, it's not just a piece of me coming along and saying, okay, you guys get 5 minutes, especially when you start saying, well, the main event or the opening match has probably got to be longer. The main event and the opening match are usually like the most important matches or moments or segments or whatever else it is. So, and like cliffhangers are great. Like, oh shit, what's going to happen next? Type thing, especially when it's a major angle, so that will keep people tuning in next week. What's next? So, but you've always got to have these segments, you've got to give everyone sort of roughly equal time in a month. You can't just be like, oh, let's give all the minutes to these guys. You got to be like, okay, how can we give some minutes to the people that we haven't given some minutes to? Like, and that's where, again, I said like before, you've got to think about like making Explosion just way better, because it's like, again, if you've got that TV time or even that other time on another show, that should be as good as what you can make it to be. Even if it is the B show, make the B show the best B show that it can be. It should be as explosive. Like, I love some of the retro matches and whatnot, and I'm sure people enjoy those as well, but what, the TNA app has got basically all those matches there somewhere anyway. So showcasing too much of like an old match is like, well, what's the point in this? Just show something, like maybe a couple of minutes worth of it, or something, and hopefully people go, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, I want to see more of this, or whatever else it is. I forgot how good this was, or I forgot about this match, or this was a cool moment, or whatever it was. I'll go back in the archives and I'll find it, or put it up onto the featured section, somewhere. If you're gonna feature something like that, in a show like that, it's like, well, why not feature it? Like, let's do something with that, not just, oh, it exists and let's move on and forget about it, or whatever else it is. And I know it might be more difficult than just saying, oh, well, let's put it up there for people to find, or whatever. Easier, it can be like that. But again, saying, if we're going to feature this, why aren't we, doing more to, help people find that, or whatever else it is, But yeah, same thing. Like, Explosion does feel like more of the slog than what Impact does. But still, you know, it's not like it couldn't do with more. Like, and sometimes I wish I was just in the editing room, you know, it's myself. But that's the thing, like, again, even if you were to think like, oh yes, this is a, you know, editing problem, or, you know, like, let's make some cuts and some changes here, or whatever else it is, you know, when you're doing a live show, you've got to be as ruthless, you know. You've got to be like, no, we can't even put out something like this or something like that, because you know it just doesn't fit. It isn't going to be good enough really for, you know, for TV. So you've got to know that this is not going to hit the mark, and you've got to go, okay, well, what are we going to do, you know, because we've got to feature this at some point, somewhere. Okay, you know, we can put it on the taping or whatever else it is, or we can put it on the sort of, not pre-show, but the dark matches or the dark segments or whatever else you want to call it, so that those things still get, you know, to live and breathe in a space of fans, but yet you're not expecting, you know, it to be as good as some of the other stuff. You know, if it does deliver, then that's cool. If it delivers better than what you expect, then that's cool. But again, you shouldn't be sending things out there to just die on their own sword, because it doesn't do anyone any favors. It makes everyone look silly if you make silly decisions and say, oh, okay, we're going to do this, why are we going to do that, you know, like this week they had you know, Tessa in that jobber match, and it was like, yeah, this, you know, like, they should have made that way shorter, you know, especially since basically it was just going to wind up in Marsha coming out to brawl with Tessa, like. So again, like, or just like, you could have foregone the match in some ways. I guess, again, you're giving the match to Tessa to kind of give her more of a rub in some ways, you know, and showcase her and say, oh yes, look at her, she's good, she's great, you know, whatever else. But when you got a jobber in there, it's like, well, yeah, that's not doing a whole lot there, buddy. It's not really elevating them that much, you know. And again, I don't want them to take somebody from the tag team scene too much and job them out, because that hurts that division, even though I keep saying it's not probably worth the time to keep around. But again, same sort of thing. Even if it's like pushing somebody up in that division a little bit in somebody's mind, you know, let's put somebody in there. You know, what are we going to do with them between now and whenever? Have we got any legit plans for this person, you know, or this team, or whatever else it is? Not really, or we don't even have opponents for them. Same for the main division there. It's like, well, who have you got for Marsha to fight? Besides, like, maybe fighting Tessa again, and then maybe fighting Indy in a few months or whatever else it is. It's like, yeah, but come on. Like, and I like Indy, and I think a lot of the fans like Indy, and I think she has a lot of respect for TNA, and she, you know, was a big TNA girl back in the day and whatnot, and I think it is somewhat a dream of hers to come to TNA and to wrestle there and to fight for the belt. But it's so tough, because we talked about this before, but again, it's so hard to get away from that WWE guy kind of mentality, you know, or that kind of feeling, you know, like, oh, they're just going to put the belt on another ex-WWE person, you know, type thing, just because they're an ex-WWE person, you know. I get that, but again, I also get the idea that what they're trying to do is not do that per se. In some ways, what they're trying to do, or even if they don't put the belt on her, I don't know, but again, I assume that that's kind of the idea eventually, you know, that you know, even if that's wrong, again, if you're at least even putting them in that position, or seemingly putting them in that position of being in a major title match, hey, this is not just to elevate her, it's to elevate, you know, this, it's to elevate somebody else, it's to always move things and keep things going and going along to say, okay, well, what's next? Who can we push next? I think also another thing about keeping sort of segments short, that would get back to this just to wrap it up sort of thing here, is to say that increases that idea of what TNA is all about. Total non-stop action. There's always something else. Here's something else. You know, like, I get, like, you have to have things be impactful, but you can't just, you know, sort of say, oh, well, you know, here's this big thing or whatever, what the heck, you know, you've got to be like, well, what's next, you know, but unless it's like super big or whatever else is big enough to sort of close the show, you know, like that's where you've got to think, okay, well, why should this close the show, or how can we make this close the show, or, you know, whatever it is, or, you know, be something that, you know, like does linger a little bit longer, you know, like especially on those moments there it's like, oh, you know, everything's lost, or oh, it's all crushed, or whatever type moments, or oh my god, this is the best moment type ever, you know, so happy for this person, you know, like, or whatever else it is. But again, that's not to do with keeping things succinct and keeping things tight. It's to do with where you plan to put the segments, you know, like, and that's another thing entirely that you've kind of got to do as well. But it is certainly important. But again, like saying we're not gonna, you know, keep everything moving or whatever else it is, at a certain point it's like, well, we can't just sit here, you know, for the next, you know, 10 minutes just watching this person, you know, cry, or this person cheer, or this whatever else it is, or these people fight. You know, there's other things to be seen, other things to be doing. And again, as I said, sometimes those things are worthwhile, or could be worthwhile, you know, being on the end of the show. But again, it does depend, you know. So yeah, but still, I feel like keeping, like, when you get to pay-per-views, I think it's a lot different, because, you know, when you've got a pay-per-view, you've got, you know, 3 hours or whatever, or even 4. But yeah, like, you've got all that time in the world to do a whole lot. But keeping the matches moving, like, is important. But again, like, you've got to have that, you know, babyface heel dynamic where the heel's doing dastardly things and whatnot, and then, you know, getting the babyface for the comeback and whatnot, for the feed and whatnot. So I get why, you know, at times the match does slow down and whatnot. But again, or sometimes it's because somebody forgot something or whatever else it was too. But again, you know, that happens, you know. But you've always got to be like, how can we make this not just, you know, something that people feel like, oh, you know, rest the whole time or whatever, you know, like, you know, this has got to matter, you know, this has got to be a fight within this has got to be more drama within this, there's got to be, you know, built up and built up and built up, you know, like, you know, so that way it feels like, you know, this is a thing that, you know, is, you know, something that the babyface, you know, needs to overcome somehow, and the crowd's invested in it. So, but that's always like something that you've kind of got to do, is get that investment from people. Like with Joe Hendry, it's pretty easy, but, you know, still, you've got to do that for everyone type thing. Everyone's kind of got to be invested in everyone, so that it's not just like, oh, well, we're not invested in this, we know the babyface is going to come back at some point, you know, type thing. You've got to feel it as much as what, you know, again, the audience kind of is, or the wrestlers kind of are. You've got to be invested. So, but yeah, guys, I think that's pretty much it. You guys, I know, you guys get it. But it's certainly important to keep these things in mind and keep discussing things that are happening, and, moving along. So yeah, we'll keep our eyes on it, and hopefully, we can make the show the number one show in wrestling, at least in terms of like quality. But anyway, guys, hope you've enjoyed this one, and hope you'll join me again in another one.